Hey there, my name's Jason Corner. I'm the MSc Course Director for Mental Health Nursing at the UEA. And my PhD explored two concepts, personhood and citizenship, and I'm just going to briefly talk through, try and summarise my thesis and ideas around personhood and citizenship. The first thing I should say is there's lots of interpretations of personhood and citizenship. As with any concept. The second thing I should say is that if you switch the suffixes of the words, they kind of mean similar things, the sort of source origin of those words. So personship and citizenhood, not necessarily that different when you trace back the origins of the word. But essentially, and simply put, personhood is about understanding your or I's state of being, and citizenship is about understanding your or I's state of being in the context of a broader sociological setting. Yeah, but we could fall down a real rabbit hole with that. So what I'm probably going to do is talk mostly about personhood, and when citizenship comes up, I'll talk about that. You'll often hear citizenship talked about as a lens on personhood in literature that focuses on people who have dementia. That's my sort of background and specialism. And you'll notice I'm in front of a painting here, and I'm going to use this. I sometimes use this to sort of illustrate what I mean. And the first thing you'll notice is the wall at the back. Yeah, there we go. There's a very clear wall, and this is a picture of a Victorian institution. And often when we talk about Victorian institutions, there is a reality to that. I'm sure we could do a Google search and find some quite alarming pictures, some that would leave us feeling quite disgruntled and unsatisfied about the history of mental health and mental health provision. But here, perhaps your initial impression is that that's not so, and that's why this picture struck out to me when I was trying to find an illustration of a Victorian institution. And where there's this kind of battle between someone's sense of personhood, sense of their being in the world, is when there's a compromise to that person's independence and autonomy. And it doesn't have to be a wall, it can be an interaction, a perceived interaction between that person and maybe a healthcare professional or a family member or someone like that. So that's the first thing I'd say, and that's where citizenship starts to overlap with personhood. Citizenship is all about this kind of protection of autonomy, roles, rights, sense of purpose, my sort of my utility within the community. Yeah, that's what it's really all about. Perhaps personhood. Crudely, we sometimes call it person-centered care, and I feel like that's sort of, we misuse that phrase often because we misuse that phrase. A shorthand of that is, well, I've learned what they like to drink and what they like to eat, and of course that's part of it, but it's a really small part of how I understand a person. And what I like about this care environment is often care environments, and this is by no means a blanket term, but because of the desire to create a safe environment, so it comes from a good place. You want to make sure the people that need our support, they're vulnerable, that's why they're there. So there are certain, the boundary around that care environment can often become restricted rather than permeable to the community. And with that comes a compromise. It comes a compromise in who, from the outside the community, the resident within that sort of rigid boundary may see. And definitely it's observable when you see care environments that have very permeable boundaries into the community. You see that in the well-being of the residents because there's a certain amount of common sense to it, but if there's lots and lots of interactions, lots of difference coming into your environment, you're going to be challenged in different ways, and you're going to feel also more attached to the world. I was about to fall into a trap there. I was about to say the world outside, and that's the fallacy that's created when you create this rigid boundary Yeah, it's a sort of becomes, that's the outside. It's different to us. We don't feel included within that community. Yeah, so there, I was falling into that trap. Actually, and it's a trap I fall into quite often when I'm talking around this. And what I like about this picture is, if I talk you through, so personhood, having an appreciation of personhood and how it might be modelled. It was born out of people with dementia being viewed very much through the pathophysiology of dementia. Yeah, the plaques and tangles in the brain that were causing them to be confused. And somewhere around the 1980s, I'm sure that wasn't the only sort of time point, but let's say there was a fueling of authors starting to scrutinise that vision. Yeah, of course we want to understand the biological processes. Of course that's important. If we could find a cure for the biological pathology, that would be incredible. However, in terms of me being able to interpret that person's experience, what they're going through in the world, it's insufficient. Yeah, I can sound really clever because I could say, oh, they've got plaques and tangles all over here and that will affect them and that means they will act in this certain way. But I don't know their personality. I don't know their health. Yeah, this changes the way that I act. I don't know their sort of social function. Yeah, how do they like to socialise? I don't know their biography. There's a huge amount of context in someone's life story and their biography if you just reflect on your own and how that affects your behaviour. It's really powerful. I remember observing one gentleman that was just engrossed in a jigsaw. This was in some research I was conducted, but very solemn. But I was impressed. This gentleman had dementia and for 8 hours he was engrossed in this jigsaw, his face very solemn. And at the end of my data collection period, I sort of thanked the gentleman for letting me conduct my research within the care home. And I started to have a chat, and it was really interesting because I was fascinated with how he'd maintained such concentration on the jigsaw. And we talked about his life, and it turned out he'd been a draftsman, like an architect. And at that point, this is the important part, at that point when he said it, his face changed. Yeah, his whole potential, he smiled, he had this attachment to his origin story, that part of his biography. It was very powerful and quite moving. And I keep alluding to this picture, and I'm standing in front of important parts of it, but this is where personhood and appreciation of who the personhood, it's compromised whenever there is this conflict between individualism and communalism. Yeah, we all have that in whatever part of society we exist. There's a compromise between how expressive I can be of my individualism within the confines of a community. And here, what I like about it is, I always think it would be interesting if we could put this kind of like a CT head scan or an MRI on our head, and we could watch the brain activity, and we could watch brain activity in response to what's going on in our environment. It would be fascinating, yeah? As I'm sat at home on my sofa watching TV, it's unlikely there's that much activity. However, watching a person within this environment here, we've got cycling, we've got this young, I think this must be a young gentleman waving golf clubs around wildly, we've got people engaged in sports, we have wildlife and animals, we have the outdoors and the light, indoors we have what we call blue light, and blue light is known to affect our circadian rhythms and how we function, our sleep, our mood. Yeah, and how anxious we are, and this is really striking. I've been standing in front of this. We've got 3 dogs here, and this is quite powerful. We've got someone who presumably is quite physically disabled, and I don't know how much poetic license there is in this picture. I'll get to that in a second. But this person who is presumably quite potentially could be quite isolated from all of this that's going on, has been included, yeah, despite their level of apparent disability. And I suppose that's about some of the best care environments I've ever seen, have this inclusive approach. No matter how severely affected someone is by their disorder, they're included within that community. The disability doesn't distance them from what's going on in the community. And I've seen the positive effect of that approach. Yeah. And a punchline, I'm aware of time, I'm on to 10 minutes, so I'll wrap this up now. But the punchline of this is that the painting was, completed by an author, not an author, a painter, didn't write it, George Sidebottom. And George Sidebottom was a resident of this institution. And it's the idea that it almost completes the wheel of that inclusivity. So my advice, I was sort of asked, what is my advice in terms of enacting personhood and citizenship? And with person, it is about trying to not attribute everything that is happening to the dementia. Yeah. It will be. It's a degenerative process. We have nothing that can slow that down at the moment. But if I have an appreciation of someone's biography, how they social function, their health, really important, their health, and their personality. If I have an appreciation of all of those things coupled up with their neurological function, I have a better appreciation of them as a person and how they're functioning. Also, from a citizenship lens, the idea that perhaps I have a really firm approach in how I create opportunities for purpose. One of the most powerful things someone said to me when I was conducting some research, and I was asking staff members to think of something that they could introduce to the care environment that was reflective of citizenship. One of the most powerful things was a lady, she was a cleaner in the care home, and she looked at me and she said, well, could I give her a duster? And it originated from her appreciation of this person she knew was constantly trying to find occupation and purpose within this care environment. And she created that purpose. And on the face of it, you could say, well, hold on a minute, she's paying quite a lot of money and she shouldn't have to do the cleaning. However, what she did was from a very caring perspective. And she created role for her. And in creating that role, that person's sense of well-being was observable to increase. You could see her engaged in meaningful activity. So that's my advice, and it's quite simple. Don't attribute everything you see in the person to the neurological processes that we know exist with dementia, and create role and purpose within that community. And however that may pan out, the role and purpose within the community is usually rooted in an appreciation of that person and their background and their context. And that's it. Yeah, I've run over time there, 13 minutes, so thank you.